So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. I know there's two others who are going to be calling in. And at this time, I'd like to call the meeting to order for this special session. And we will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We don't have a quorum to approve the agenda. Hello, who's calling in?
This is Jim.
Well, hello again, Senator Woodward. Nice to have you join us a second time. I'm sorry, I had a little technical difficulty here, and I think I hung up on both you and President Critchfield, so I apologize.
Well, if it's good to do something once, you might as well do it twice.
There you go. There you go. We will ask those who are on the line to introduce themselves. I'll start with those of us physically present here. I'm Geraldine Lewis, the chair of our school board.
Tom Albertson, Superintendent, Lake Pend Oreille School District.
Lonnie Williams, Vice Chair of the board.
And then those of you on the line can introduce yourselves if you can.
I'm Lisa Halls. I'm the Chief Financial and Operations Officer.
Hi, this is Andrea Murray. I'm Director of Teaching and Learning here in Lake Pend Oreille School District.
And then we both heard that Debbie Critchfield, who's the president of the Idaho State Board of Education, is on the line, as well as Senator Jim Woodward. So welcome to both of you. So
Thank you.
before we begin, can I get an approval of the agenda?
I make a motion to approve the agenda as published.
And
Don't have a quorum.
we are...
Somebody else.
Oh, hello, who has just called in?
This is Kerry calling. Sorry to be late.
That's excellent timing. Carrie Kelly is another one of our trustees, and I'm going to ask for that motion again to approve the agenda from our vice chair.
I make a motion to approve the agenda as published.
Carrie, can I get a second?
Yes, and I second that motion.
Excellent. The agenda has been moved and seconded. So we will move right on into our agenda, which has basically one line item, which is to hear from both of you. And Senator Jim Woodward, I would just like to open it up for any of your thoughts on the fourth week of the legislative session and things that pertain to education.
Well, thank you, Geraldine. I appreciate that, and I'm glad to have the chance to talk with everyone.
Yeah.
The odd year, we know. We are starting to get into some of the nuts and bolts. We're in the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee, starting to work with our smaller groups on budgets. So we at lunchtime today we sat down. We have a subgroup for K-12 budget, and that was our second meeting of that. We have, of course, our normal committee meetings, but we get into the details, and we'll work up with 4 or 5 members from each chamber, work up the details of what we want to do with the school budget, and if that's any different from the governor's recommendation. The budget recommendation for fiscal year 2022 right now showing general fund increase of about $73 million, and then there's some other small changes too. So general funds up by 3.7% as proposed, and total funds up by 4.8% as proposed. Mm-hmm. So we'll just go down through all those different distributions, the statutory requirements, and some of the other distributions, and come up with a number here. So, and then at some point you'll hear in JFAC a motion, get that motion for that budget out of JFAC and then on through both of the House and Senate. So I think you'll see there are some new investments that the governor's proposed, some more literacy dollars. Of course, there's a lot of different money out there this year for the different, through the CARES Act, ESSER funding 1 and 2. So a lot of different opportunities hopefully we can take advantage of. But Debbie, do you want to add to that on the money or whatever, any other thoughts?
Well, I would just add, while we're talking about the governor's budget recommendation, as I believe everybody knows, it was his recommendation to close out the remainder of this school year and reverse a proposed freeze of the career ladder and freezing of any increases in classified and administrator salary increases. So I know that the department should be, if they're not already, working with business managers and staff in the coming weeks to figure out how to implement how this would work. But I think it's a great sign and a signal, and certainly good news from the governor's perspective on how we can continue to retain the high quality staff that we need to have in our schools.
Definitely. Are there any, well, I won't ask my questions at this time. I'll leave it open to both of you to add anything else that's happening there in Boise that you'd want to share impacting education.
I think the enrollment rule change is probably the most frequently discussed education topic right now, and I don't believe, I got to think about this, it's not made its way, I think, has it been over to Senate Ed yet? I'm losing track of
The enrollment rule?
where.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that the rule that we struck a couple lines out, so we started that.
Yes. And so as we continue to get legislators to understand why we did that, there was some questioning as to why. And I explained that when I talked and listened to school districts in the summer, and as we were asking people to get opened in some form, priority being in person, that all the uncertainty around any type of operational budget, not knowing what your enrollment would be like, not knowing how long you could stay in school, and all of the issues that are associated with counting attendance, daily attendance, our board moved forward with that enrollment rule. And so it's a temporary rule, and barring action from the legislature, it expires at the end of the session, and then there would be an opportunity to go through another rulemaking exercise if folks were inclined to want to either make it permanent, find some tweaks, or do something entirely different. But we're hopeful that this way of funding schools will get some attention and support.
Yeah.
So Geraldine, so Debbie, this is Tom. A little clarification on that. So the temporary rule expires at the end of the legislative session, correct?
Right.
So is it up to the legislators, or could the state board reinstate that?
Well, as far as, I'm going to change your word reinstate, we could move forward with rule promulgation. And so clearly the legislature can and does put things into statute, or they codify something, and that's an opportunity that they have right now. And barring any action from them, yes, our board would then begin a process of a pending rule, put something out, have it go to common, and that would ultimately find its way back to the legislature for the 2022 session.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for that
Tom,
clarification. Yes,
Tom,
Jim.
this is Jim. So was your question is specifically in regards to the enrollment versus ADA?
It is, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And I have not seen a proposal on that, but we did talk about that a week ago, so I appreciate the question, if I need to follow up on that one.
So I guess the clarification that that was just given by President Critchfield was, if there is no action taken by the legislators to make that, does not mean that it would not occur again. It would just need to go through the process with the state board again.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
So at the end of this legislation or legislative session, if there's no action of any kind, then it defaults back to how we've done it with ADA.
Right.
And at that point, our board hasn't formally talked about what that process would be and what that would look like because we're in the legislative session. But we would certainly, I would say in April, look at what action had or had not taken place, and then begin the discussion on how do we want to bring this back? Is it an expectation from school districts that this is how we be funded in the future? And if so, does it look exactly like what we had as the current or the temporary rule, or does it need to be adjusted in some form or another?
Okay, great, thank you.
This is Lisa with a follow-up to both Senator Woodward and President Critchfield. So, could maybe Jim, more specifically to you, what do you think the sentiment is in actually putting funding school districts on enrollment into statute this session? I mean, of course, we now have a year and a half of enrollment data, and unfortunately, from March of 2020 forward, that enrollment data is not representative of a traditional year, but of course, many years antecedent to the pandemic, various committees have discussed moving Idaho to an enrollment-based funding formula.
Lisa, I'd answer. I believe there's an interest in it in the folks I know, the fellow Senate Ed members. I don't have a feel for the House members, but I am realizing this conversation. I don't think there's anyone driving that, and so
Right.
I need to go run that one down.
Right, because a legislature has to sponsor an RS, and
Right.
it's right. It's seemingly that would happen in Senate Ed. It's not going to happen in House Ed.
Right. So
In my
we'll run that one down. We'll run that.
The House is, I would say the House Education Committee, based on my experience listening and talking with their committee members, they are interested in funding schools differently, but to be very frank with you, they're interested in education savings accounts and having the dollars follow the students. And so I don't think that I think that they're interested in enrollment-based funding, but not for the reasons that you want them to be. And so you're right that there hasn't been anyone step forward to champion this is how we should fund public schools, but you're going to see shortly several people step forward to say this is how we should be funding education.
Lisa Halls, our CFO, I will turn it over to you if you have any other questions or even broader, more general questions for President Critchfield or Senator Woodward.
Okay, thank you, Chair Lewis. I have several questions. So in no linear order in terms of priority. My next question I think probably would be for Senator Woodward. Can you tell me, please, exactly legislatively, what are the next steps for fiscal year 21 K-12 appropriations? And of course, the executive order of July 20th from Governor Little, configuration of the 5% holdback is, fundamentally different than his State of the State. Was that January 9th, 2021? And I know not only our school district, but districts statewide, depending on particularly where your teachers fall on the career ladder and how many of your teachers could advance to the new advanced professional rung. I know Paul Headley was supposed to go through that with JFAC Thursday, and then things went long, and I don't see, at least as of this week, maybe on Thursday afternoon, JFAC talked about rescission budgets again. I personally need to understand what the next legislative steps are.
Well, I'm not sure I'm not sure I'm quite getting the question, Lisa, because I think you've been following the process just about as close as I am, so I'm not quite sure what you're answering or asking for of me.
When would JFAC address the fiscal year 21 configuration of the 5% holdback? Right? They have to approve that. The legislature has to approve it.
Well, yeah. I think there are a lot of negotiations going on, a lot of politics. So there's not. That's why you're not seeing it on a schedule. Is the short
Right.
answer? Is that?
Okay, let me ask it a different way then.
I might have a different answer.
Right, so bear with me. So the budget setting starts on, is it February 17th? And somewhere just prior to that, JFAC will set its revenue projections. And in my mind, JFAC would have to act on the K-12 fiscal year 21 budget before they would proceed to any other agency fiscal year 22 budget setting.
Yeah, the co-chairs are setting those little pieces that you're talking about there. The black boxes on that big schedule that I sent you on the supplemental decision. So I don't know. We're not getting that agenda any earlier than you are. I've shared what I have, and
Okay,
so it's going to be
and of course I so appreciate that. Yes.
Yeah. So it's either the 8th or the 12th or the 18th is where that's going to happen then.
Okay. Well, that's helpful. You know, but again, this is a question for Senator Woodward. Because you sat on the Economic Outlook and Revenue Assessment Committee, and because you also sit on JFAC, of course, then the governor also has their own revenue projection, and sometimes all three coalesce, and sometimes, you know, that's not the case. In your opinion, do you think that JFAC is going to coalesce around what now not only the governor and the Economic Outlook recommendation to JFAC as far as fiscal year 22's revenue outlook?
I haven't heard any indication of anyone balking at that. 20 of us in there, and I haven't had conversations with everyone, but I expect there'll be, because those projections are probably really could be fairly conservative, then it will probably be right in line with that. I know there's going to be another report coming out in just a day or here in a day or two on for last month's revenue, state revenues, and going to be up a big number again. So that we have been talking about a total of about $600 million of revenue this year. That's in excess of anticipated. That number is going to grow even more so. If you've heard that $600 million figure, is oftentimes called a surplus. That is primarily comprised of one-time funding. That's not funding that's coming forward year after year. That $600 million, about a third of that is because of the Medicaid match rate being higher this year. Another big piece of that is because of the 5% holdbacks. And then the other part of it is just the fact that the economy is running stronger than we expected. But I think most people would look at the economy running stronger than expected this year. It has a lot to do with federal money flowing into the state. And that number is upwards of $8 billion that's come into the state total between unemployment and just straight checks being cut to taxpayers, and then the other programs we've seen. So the key point there, that money that's here this year that's sitting above the balance at the end of your balance, $600 million, that's all money that is not coming in year after year like income tax and sales tax, where we see income tax grow and sales tax grow. Not all of that is ongoing money at one time, and hence the reasoning behind the governor's proposal to make some one-time investments in capital infrastructure, put some in rainy day funds because we're still not back where we were before 2008, and then so that's the plan there. I think another that thing we should talk about just briefly that just happened today, if you maybe you're aware, but the governor just rolled us back to stage 3 on the pandemic, of the rebound plan, and that's pretty important for everyone, and people are going to be looking to the health districts and the cities, any subunit of government, including school boards that have restrictions in place. People, I think, are going to be looking to you to see what your thoughts are in regards to, or how you might go along with that, moving back to stage 3 from stage 2. With stage 3 not having any mandatory requirements, it's all shoulds and guidance, should and not must. So that I think is something that hopefully folks are starting to consider. But Debbie, do you have some other thoughts you'd like to share?
Relative to stage 3?
That, or just anything in general with where we're headed with the schools?
Well, I might make a comment regarding the opening of other extracurricular activities outside of athletics. As you know, in stage 2, we were able to get a carve out in that order to allow the increased capacity. And so in the last, month, well, it's been more than a month now, 6 weeks or whenever it is that this came about, I've had a lot of questions and feedback on how does this impact other aspects of extracurricular performances. And I think as we move into the spring and we see a lot of the arts as far as festivals with choirs and those types of things, I know that this has been a question of the day, and I would encourage you, so now what happens with those types of things, whether it's your drama department presenting some type of a event, a play or whatever, or it's your band wanting to perform, that now within stage 3, local, you are able to, like performing arts centers and some of these things, that you can now apply with a plan, submit a plan to your local health district for consideration above and beyond the 50 limit. And as the senator pointed out, there is some other allowances with the changing of the language. And so I would encourage you, if there are things, activities that students are involved in that have been restricted while in stage 2, that you work with whoever it is that you need to in your local health department, that more students will have the opportunity to participate and have more of an audience. And to me, it doesn't make any sense to say we can have 40% of spectators at a basketball game but not sitting in an auditorium. And so this is something that I've been working on with the governor's office, and we're wanting to come out with something that is specific to these types of things like we did with athletics. And I'm not saying it's going to take 3 months to do it, but while you're in the meantime, I guess that's a better way to say it. In the meantime, don't wait on us. If there are things that you know that you could manage and you've got a plan, get it into your health department and let them give you an approval on that.
That's good to know.
And stay tuned. Like I say, we're working within the next couple of days to get something out there so that our students that are involved in something other than wrestling have an opportunity to have some of these same experiences.
Yep. Lisa, did you have other questions to,
I have three other questions, and
Okay.
then I know our Director of Teaching and Learning also has a few questions. So my next question is, this has to do with, I guess, impressions. And by impressions, I mean that, statewide student enrollment is down. And of course, there has been infusion through the CARES money of March 27th, and now the new SRSA money from December 27th, and then by governor action, some other online learning federal money, and when, for example, Alex Adams gets up and presents to the Economic Outlook Committee or to JFAC and shows with that infusion, in fact, what's the percentage increase to the K-12 appropriation compared to the prior year. And I feel like that potentially the legislature doesn't understand that the federal money is limited to 15 different items, and that with the pandemic there were considerably increased costs. Is my impression correct, or do you think that?
Lisa, yeah, Lisa, this is Jim. Every conversation I've had with the Division of Financial Management, they emphasize that there's a lot of flexibility in this funding, and
Right.
they're the ones responsible for how it's spent. And so I think if you have specific questions that we need to address, we can certainly do that, because to my knowledge, you should be able to use this money, because the wording that Administrator Adams explained to me last week, there's a catch-all at the end of those U.S. Treasury guidelines that allows you to use that money as you see fit to respond. And that, so I think there is quite a bit of flexibility in that.
I think that the issue tacking on to that is, as Jim's pointed out, the ESSER 2 funds, that is wide open. As he said, the last category is essentially an other. The tricky part is the money that you got that had to be spent, that you got in the fall, October, I think, is when that got sent out. Except that it wasn't sent out. I know that it's a reimbursement process, and it was more restrictive in those funds. And so a week ago, there was a conversation with the department on recognizing that you need to get the ESSER 1 funds spent before you can have the more broadly accessible funds in ESSER 2, that we try to streamline the process through the department so that there's not such a lag time. It would ideally, the money, you have your money and you're able to spend that, and that you don't have, I don't know, we've heard from other districts that there's been a cash flow problem waiting on those distribution or on the reimbursements. And I don't know if that's been an issue for you, but we've heard of it. And so, like I say, last week had some conversations with the department on how we can speed that process up so that you can work through those funds more quickly to get to the ESSER 2.
So this is Lisa. We have not had a cash flow problem, but again, because I network very closely with other business managers, really one of the key maybe linchpins is that reimbursements are being rejected, and
Really?
And the business managers aren't understanding why, and so I guess I would respectfully say that although both of you are articulating that the funds are very flexible, that particularly the webinars that are being conducted, hosted by the federal programs director, send a very different message.
Okay.
And then
That's good to know.
Yeah, and I would love to elaborate with either or both of you on that in maybe a different phone call.
Okay.
Okay.
We've heard a variety of frustrations, and the money came to the state or the Board of Education as the SEA. But for management and distribution purposes, you've got to have somebody that can actually, get the work done, so that we pass that on to the Department of Education. And there were some things that, as board members, we just had not circled back to have the conversation on how is this working, what is it that you're hearing. And so as we heard more feedback, but I hadn't heard about rejections of reimbursement. So I'm going to add that to the list. But I will tell you that we want to make this easier for you. We don't want, there's a lot of complicated and challenging things that you're dealing with. We don't want this to be one.
Mm-hmm.
So I have two other questions. The next one has to do just with the property tax interim committee that Senator Woodward participated on, and our board has been apprised that they're going to ask to reconvene after this session, and that there were 3 RSs that they recommended be brought forth. And the one I wanted to talk about has to do with fund balance. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's going anywhere, Jim, but I would just say on our side, Lake Pend Oreille School District, we wouldn't support that RS, and there are many reasons, but one of the primary reasons is that we have a permanent supplemental levy in place that's effective July 1st, 2021. So now there are 6 school districts in the state that have this type of permanent levy, and the strategy of the other 5 districts, and we will mirror that strategy, is because it's a fixed dollar amount, and we want to have that fixed dollar amount for as many consecutive years as is fiscally possible, and by limiting the amount of fund balance that we can accumulate, and then over the next several fiscal cycles spend it down. That RS as it was written, we wouldn't be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding right now is that is proposal dead.
Okay.
I don't think you'll see anything.
Okay.
But there's
right.
still a concern there, and there's a little bit of policy for everyone to consider. When you're accumulating taxpayer money, then you're asking today's taxpayer to pay for the recipient in the future, and the opposite can be true. But so fairness in taxation.
Mm-hmm.
My thought is that ideally today's taxpayer pays for today's services.
Mm-hmm.
Just a little piece to share.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't you argue, Jim, this is Lonnie, couldn't you argue that the stimulus is coming from today's taxpayer, so it is today's taxpayer that's funding it? And we're going to have, like, if we can't accumulate these funds, it forces districts like ours to go back to the taxpayer when we don't want to, and it's not our intention to, much sooner.
Oh, and I'm not talking about a cash flow situation, managing cash flow and small fund balances. I'm referring to large fund balances with where you accumulate enough money to build a school.
Right.
I see you.
2 different scenarios.
Yes, that is.
Yeah.
Lisa, you have one more question, I believe.
Yeah, my final question is there's a lot of attention towards additional disclosures on bond and levy election ballots, and I'm just wondering, how far you think that's going to go on the Senate side, Senator Woodward.
I haven't heard any of that discussion, so I'll watch for it.
Okay. Those are all of my questions.
Okay, there are a lot of proposals that come out of one end of the building.
Yeah, I know.
I do want to, this is Geraldine, Chair of the Board again, and I would like to ask our Director of Teaching and Learning, Andra Murray, if she has some questions to address to either one of you.
Hi, I'm unmuted, and yes, just two, and I'll be brief. My first won't surprise Senator Woodward, but I was looking for any update on the standards review process. We do have some educators here from our district participating in that small group process for math, ELA, and science. And while I know we're several years out from potential implementation, review of 3 sets of standards at once, and thus the curricular audit and the professional development is something that would take a high degree of resources. And we'd be looking to know a little bit about public comment periods or just where that may be in the process.
So the conversation that I'm a part of is the content standards, math, ELA, and science. And is that, you're referring to something else, I think, aren't you, Andra?
No, that process.
No, that's what you're talking about?
Yes.
The 2000, where we're supposed, yeah. So here in the legislature, there is not very much agreement on that. The math standards, perhaps, that they were the summer efforts. Things like the math, there seems to be some coalescing of thought around the math standards. I don't know if it's the same around the others. But I guess the short summary is there's probably enough disagreement that there's no movement in the legislature.
Great.
Debbie, do you think that anything different there?
No, I think you got it right. This seems to be, math seems to have a consensus. Science is hot button.
Yes.
And ELA is sort of like, we don't love it, but do we hate it? And so, as Jim pointed out on the House side, this hasn't even been a conversation over there yet as far as publicly, formally. And I'll be interested to see what happens because 2 of the key members of House Ed that served on the legislative interim committee in the summer are very, very unhappy.
Yes, understood. Okay, thank you on that. And then my second is a little more short-term, looking ahead to next fall and planning our student schedules. You know that we are in person here, but on a modified day, slightly shortened because that's when our educators do their online prep for students who may be in quarantine. It's our understanding that any flexibility in rule, all of those will end at the end of this session as far as meeting some student learning minutes, perhaps in a hybrid or online way. And there's a challenge there from my vantage point of predicting that some students may still be in a quarantine situation next year. So just checking our thinking that rule would end, and has there been any conversation that you're aware of around flexibility for student learning minutes to be met with some hybrid learning, of course with the majority in person, but looking at meeting our minimums. Thank you.
I'm glad you asked that question, Andra. I think that we've looked at it on the Senate end of the building, and I drove that conversation and didn't want to go forward with making a rule, a permanent rule that had that accommodation in it. So that's still it's still open over in the House Ed Committee. So what we did could be ignored or accepted. But it sounds like maybe I better get the details from you if we need to try and accommodate that. I'm sure that President Critchfield would be interested to be in that conversation too, since if we do need to accommodate something there come fall.
Absolutely. And we've learned a lot of things in the last year, and I think one of the things that we've learned is the numbers that we have in rule for students, do they, I mean, I had to question, do they make sense now? And I answered myself and said no. And so I asked the chair of one of the board committees, Dr. Linda Clark, former superintendent in West Data, to begin work on what is it that we want schools to focus on when it comes to seat time, if you want to call it seat time, instructional time, and why these minutes don't make sense. Now, our process to change that is slower because we have to follow that rulemaking process that's a little bit longer. But certainly, if the legislature, they can expedite that and could determine what they wanted it to look like. And so, getting back to your question, yes, there was flexibility that was granted this year as far as waiving that rule. That will go away and would only come back again if something were codified by way of the legislature or the board were to bring something back. So both of us would be very interested in your thoughts there.
Thank you so much. I'll follow up offline, and I appreciate your time today.
Thanks.
Thank you, Andra. I know that we have at least one trustee, Carrie Kelly, on the line, and I have a trustee next to me. I would like to open it up to our superintendent, Tom, and ask if he has any questions here to bring forward, and then we'll ask the trustees lastly if they have any thoughts.
I guess, I don't know if this is a question, but maybe clarification. I see Governor Little, wanting to invest into summer school heavily, and I heard, bits and pieces of focusing K-3, 6 weeks of summer school. I'm just curious and maybe it's not in either one of your realms, but what flexibility there would be with what that may look like at a local district, because that's a very big undertaking, and a one-size-fits-all is a little concerning. We believe in bridging that gap of loss of learning, but we would like to have some flexibility of how we feel best that would look in our community. So, any comments or questions on that?
I don't know that the details of that have not been fully explained to me either, and so the focus is summer interventions. The fine details of that are to be determined, and I would expect that the governor's office would want to, and I mean, in addition to what they know, would solicit other ideas, and I would agree that allowing districts flexibility on how to address their specific needs would be a preference,
right?
And would certainly advocate for that if asked.
I mean, we're a school district where students, yes, we've had disruptions, but we have been in 5 days a week, though it's shortened. We feel that they've had that connection with their teachers. We're obviously in the process of assessing what learning gaps we have due to COVID, but that would be different than, say, I know if we had been fully remote for a long period of time, we may be talking a whole different story. So I think there's some differences there. So anyway, thank you.
Do you have any other questions, Superintendent?
With the time we have remaining, I'll turn it over to the trustees.
And I will ask, Trustee Williams is sitting next to me. I'll ask if he has any questions.
One of the questions I have is on the August election date and the changes along with that, long term, if that's really something moving forward or what we can expect there.
Lonnie, are you asking about reducing the number of election cycles at a time?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen anything come up yet so far. There are always some folks here. There's always a narrative that should put it on the regular election cycle, but usually don't get very far when you try to explain the school budgetary cycle, budgeting cycle.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I haven't seen any proposals. I haven't seen any bills yet on that this year.
Okay.
But I'm sure they're coming.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else?
No further questions.
Trustee Carrie Kelly, do you have anything to ask or add to this?
No, I don't have anything to ask. Lisa took all my questions. But I do want to thank Jim and others for taking the time to be with us. And I do get the feeling that you're fighting for us, and I think you have a pretty good idea of what we want, which is basically less regulation and more money. So, thank you. Thank you very much.
The best possible answer from government, huh?
Nailed it.
Thank you, Carrie.
Supermajority.
I don't know
yeah.
if there's any other callers on the line who haven't identified themselves that maybe snuck in and I didn't hear them. I don't think so. So,
Can I ask another quick question?
yes, Trustee Williams has one more.
I know this was touched on in capital notes, but is there any movement or appetite for legislation to change the bond measure majority rules on elected bond measures moving forward? From a supermajority to simple
Something
majority.
was, yeah.
No, I haven't seen that one either, Lonnie.
Oh, okay.
Debbie, have you heard anything on that?
No, that has been around. Was a school trustee for 10 years ago, and that's the perennial question, and I've certainly advocated for that as well. But
Yeah.
it never blossoms. That's
Yeah.
one that gets killed right away.
Yeah. Well,
Okay, thank
So
you.
along that line, I haven't heard of anything, but maybe Jim, obviously, construction facilities is always an issue in lots of school districts. When the state has a large surplus, is there ever talk of finding a way to help school districts repair and build facilities other than going to your local property taxpayers?
I believe there is some money in the Building Idaho's Future that will hopefully end up that way. The Building Idaho's Future plan is just that, a plan, so it has to go through the legislative and appropriation process, but part of that package had some investment, so some money available for school districts.
well, that's
I'll double check on that.
Okay.
more encouraging answer than I thought you were going to get, Superintendent Albertson.
Yeah, thank you.
It's not a huge amount of
Right.
money if you look at the state, but
Right.
Right.
you can get the conversation moving that way.
Right.
Well,
There's definitely the idea of that I've heard floated around a fair amount. I haven't seen anything written yet, though. But the idea of impact fees for schools.
Oh,
okay.
that's never been available. Is there talk this legislative session?
There's talk.
Okay.
The mantra we hear oftentimes is growth should pay for growth, and I think the impact fees are one way that you can do that.
Right. I will just echo the thoughts of all of our Board of Trustees and everyone, thanking you, Senator Woodward and President Critchfield, for your time. I know it's end of a busy day and weeks for you guys, so I appreciate you taking the time out to hear us, to answer questions, and to just give us your perspectives. Is there any last thoughts or questions we have while they're on the line, or?
Just thank you guys. I appreciate your time
Yeah.
and everything that you're doing for us.
Thanks for the opportunity. I'm just glad I've been able to get to know President Critchfield a little bit better, and it's very nice down here when you find folks who you're able to, one, be comfortable with, and two, to work with and try and get something done.
Yeah, that's great.
See if you can get some snow up here.
I just, real quickly, I just want to take 15 seconds.
Sure.
And I mean this sincerely. Thank you for all that you do in your district. I cannot think of a more awful time to be in leadership positions. And there's no easy answers, and you can't please everyone, and many sleepless nights. And I want you to know, and I mean this truly from our board, just thank you for keeping everybody where they need to be. Thank you for continuing education. And thanks for carrying this heavy load right now.
I appreciate that.
Thank you. We do appreciate that. So, yeah.
Well,
Okay.
at this time, I believe that we have accomplished everything we hope to with this agenda, and so I will call the meeting at this point for an adjournment.